Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the opening drone shot of a moody, cinematic video. The ocean is vast, the skies are pitch dark, and for centuries, ships and planes have been vanishing into that void without a single trace. Today, in this explainer, we're opening up the historical case file on one of the most hotly debated regions on the entire planet, the Bermuda Triangle. We're going to strip away all the hearsay, dig into the actual documented timelines, and look at the sheer scale of an area that has literally terrified and fascinated sailors for over 5 centuries.
To really wrap our heads around the gravity of this, we've got to start with this absolutely staggering number. Get this. Over the past 550 years, it's estimated that more than 100 planes, over 200 ships, and upward of 2,000 people have vanished in this specific patch of ocean. 2,000 people! Just think about that for a second. We aren't talking about a single freak storm or, one unlucky crew. We're looking at centuries of compounding mysteries, a relentless, epic saga of tragedy and unanswered questions spanning generations.
So, where exactly is the stage set for this epic mystery? Well, the Bermuda Triangle is a roughly triangular region right in the western North Atlantic. Your defining points are Miami, Florida, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and the island of Bermuda. And depending on who you ask, you'll also hear this zone ominously referred to as the Devil's Triangle or the Graveyard of the Atlantic. It sits smack in the middle of major historic shipping lanes, which really sets the scene for exactly why so many vessels are passing through it in the first place.
And the scale we're dealing with here is absolutely massive. Estimates of the triangle's size do vary wildly, but we're talking anywhere from 1.3 million to an incredible 3.9 million square kilometers. To put that into a relatable perspective, that's up to 1.5 million square miles of open, volatile ocean. It really highlights just how vast and intimidating the search area truly is. Like, when a ship goes missing out here, finding wreckage isn't like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's honestly more like looking for a needle in an entire ocean of haystacks.
Let's move to Section 1. Myths, Monsters, and Theories, attempting to explain the unexplainable, and see how this builds.
When faced with a totally unexplainable mystery, the human mind just naturally races to fill in the blanks, right? And that's resulted in a wild spectrum of proposed theories. Some people believe giant magnetic anomalies are just pulling ships down to the crushing depths. Others claim it's the sunken lost city of Atlantis at work, or maybe a zone of voodoo and paranormal entities. Some religious scholars have even suggested it's the home of the Dajjal. And if we look at the sci-fi angle, you'll hear theories about oceanic wormholes or, yes, even an alien airport used to abduct humans for Earth research. Now, while these definitely make for some thrilling campfire stories, we're just here to map the legends as impartial reporters and analyze the actual historical data that sparked these wild imaginations to begin with.
Moving right along to Section 2, Columbus and Early Disappearances, the First Records.
Our timeline actually kicks off way back in 1492. As Christopher Columbus was approaching the Americas, he wrote some incredibly eerie entries in his logbook. He literally reported seeing a giant fireball crash into the sea and noted that his compasses began behaving erratically, failing to point to true north. That definitely set a spooky precedent. Then, fast forward to 1800, and the American naval vessel USS Pickering simply vanishes with 90 people on board. That marks one of the very first official military disappearances. In 1814, the USS Wasp, which was a warship that had actually defeated British vessels, disappeared with 170 men. And by 1824, the heavily armed, pirate-hunting USS Wildcat was lost with 31 sailors. So we went from strange compass readings to massive military vessels vanishing without a single trace.
So now we enter Section 3, the era of ghost ships left behind.
Okay, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the stark contrast between these mysteries. On one hand, we have the typical tragedy. A ship like the USS Wasp just completely vanishes. No wreckage, no distress signals, entirely swallowed by the sea. Tragic for sure, but in rough oceans, it's somewhat understandable. But on the other hand, we have a much more chilling puzzle. Ships found completely intact. Floating perfectly fine, the cargo is perfectly safe, there are no leaks, no signs of a battle, but the crews are entirely, inexplicably missing. It's like something straight out of a horror movie.
And that poses a really direct, chilling question. Why would highly trained, experienced sailors abandon a perfectly intact floating ship in the middle of the ocean? What could possibly drive a crew to flee into the open water when their vessel was perfectly safe?
Well, let's look at the first piece of evidence for this. In August of 1840, 2 British ships came across a massive 222-foot French wooden ship called the Rosalie.
The British sailors boarded her and found an incredibly eerie scene. There was absolutely zero sign of a struggle. The sails were perfectly set, a highly valuable cargo of silk and wine was completely untouched. The captain's important papers were just sitting right there on his desk. The only signs of life on the entire vessel were a caged canary and a cat, crying from hunger. The whole ship was just wrapped in this ghostly silence.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the Mary Celeste, which was found in 1872 and is probably the most famous ghost ship of them all. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, and 7 crewmen were all just gone. They left behind 6 months of food and water, 1,701 barrels of untouched commercial alcohol, and all their personal belongings. The captain's logbook was even left open on the desk with the last entry made 10 days prior. The only things missing were a single lifeboat and a few navigation tools. It is completely baffling why a captain would take his wife and toddler into a tiny lifeboat and abandon a totally seaworthy ship without taking their valuables or survival gear.
And the ghost ship stories only get stranger from there. In 1881, a massive ship called the Ellen Austin found an abandoned, intact vessel just drifting in the fog. The captain of the Ellen Austin put a salvage crew on board to sail it back. Well, a storm hit, the ship separated, and the next day, the salvage crew had vanished into thin air. The captain, not wanting to give up, put a second crew on the ghost ship. Another storm hit, and incredibly no way, that second crew vanished into thin air as well. As a wild, surprising postscript from our source material, after all sorts of legal battles, that cursed ghost ship was eventually sold to a German company who coincidentally renamed it Meta. Just a bizarre historical footnote to a really terrifying story.
That brings us to Section 4, Tragedies of the 20th Century. The scale increases.
Despite all our advancements in technology, the mysteries only grew larger. Take the case of the USS Cyclops. This was the absolute pride of the U.S. Navy during World War I. On March 4, 1918, this colossal 550-foot vessel, carrying 306 souls and 11,000 tons of heavy manganese ore, departed Barbados. The skies were clear, the weather was completely calm, and yet the ship vanished. Not a single distress signal was sent. Despite massive naval search operations, not a single piece of wood, oil slick, or scrap of wreckage was ever found. A gigantic floating city of steel simply evaporated from the face of the earth.
The disappearance was so completely inexplicable that it baffled the absolute highest levels of the United States government. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson somberly declared, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." It really highlights the total helplessness of modern authorities when faced with the Triangle's mysteries. And this brilliantly illustrates our final case file for today, the Carol A. Deering in 1921. Here's how it went down. On January 29th, the ship hails a lightship, noting they'd lost their anchors in a storm. 2 days later, on January 31st, it's found run aground on the notorious Diamond Shoals. But here is the truly chilling detail. When rescuers boarded, the sails were up and a meal was actively being prepared, just sitting in the galley ready to be eaten. But all 11 men were simply gone, swallowed by the air, leaving their dinner behind.
Which brings us to the end of today's explainer, and to this final provocative thought. From Columbus's erratic compass in 1492 to the ghost ships of the 1920s with hot meals left on the stove, are these just isolated tragedies, unlucky coincidences amplified by folklore? Or are they pieces of a much larger, entirely unexplained puzzle? We've laid out the historical case files today, but the true explanations? Well, those still await discovery out there in the deep, dark waters of the Atlantic. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explain the unexplainable.